All right. So hi and welcome to today's CEU webinar offered exclusively to ILFI's member community. I will turn it over to our speakers for today after a few short announcements from me. While we're getting started, please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat. You can include where you're calling in from, maybe some professional details. I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Liz Harder, and I am ILFI's Member Engagement Director, and I'm calling in from Minnesota, from the Twin Cities. And just a note that we encourage you all to use the Zoom chat liberally today. We encourage everyone to use the chat to connect with each other, ask questions throughout the presentations, and we may have time for Q&A at the end. If we don't end up having time for Q&A, we will share a link to the member discussion board so that everyone can continue the conversation and ask their questions asynchronously. So today's webinar is part of a series that we're running this week, covering case studies from each Petal or performance area of the Living Building Challenge. Be sure to sign up for the other webinar that we're having this week on Thursday. And if you missed yesterday's, we will have the recording available in the member dashboard for all of these webinars. So no worries. And now to quickly just cover some of the CEUs that you're earning today. Our objectives for today's webinar are to learn about the intent and requirements of the LBC place and water petals. We are going to learn about strategies and resources for achieving each of these petals from the Stanley Center for Peace and Security and Santa Monica City Hall East project team members. By attending today's webinar, you're earning 1 LFA general credit and 1 AIA LUHSW. And instructions for CEU reporting for AIA and LFA will be included in an email that I'll send to everyone after the webinar. So with that, I will hand it off to Emma Burns, who's ILFI's Buildings Manager, to introduce the place petal.
Thanks. Yeah, so today we're going to start out with the project, Stanley Center for Peace and Security, that we feel truly exemplifies the spirit and intent of the place petal. So for those of you who are familiar with older versions of the Living Building Challenge, you might remember this used to be called the site petal. It was renamed in order to emphasize the concept of place building over site development. So the idea that a truly good building doesn't just mean minimizing environmental harm on site, but actually restoring both the ecological and social functioning of the site and bringing those human and non-human elements into balance with each other. So not easy for sure, but you'll see the Stanley Center team really understood the assignment. So in Living Building Challenge 4.0, the place petal has 4 imperatives. Ecology of place is a core imperative, and it contains a mix of ecological and social requirements. So this is the imperative that defines where it is appropriate and inappropriate to build. And it also requires that the project team define its reference habitat so they can successfully restore the site's ecological functioning. It also requires that the team assess cultural and equity factors and address those factors in their design. The urban agriculture imperative requires that the project dedicate a portion of the site to growing food and/or participate in providing food access to the community. For example, they could host a farmer's market. And by doing so, they hopefully repair some of that human nature disconnect and address resilience concerns that arise out of our estrangement from our food sources. The habitat exchange imperative addresses concerns over disappearing wildlands by requiring that the project support the protection of land through a land trust. And the human skilled living imperative targets the social and environmental harms caused by sprawling fossil fuel reliant development by encouraging greater site density, greater walkability and bikeability, infrastructure for electric vehicles, and a connection to and use of public transportation. So we're only giving the team 15 or 20 minutes to tell their story. So I know they won't get to touch on all of these requirements, but the good news is that their focus today will be on some of the more complex, less straightforward strategies that the Place Petal encourages, which they really knocked out of the park. So with that, I'll pass it to the Newman-Monson team.
Yes, thank you for having us. Let me get the screen share started here. Hopefully I'm doing the right one. There we go. Whoops, we're going to back up just a minute here. All right, well, thank you, everyone. You can hear me okay? I get a few head nods. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for having us. I hope we live up to that synopsis of topics we're going to cover. This is a pretty short presentation, so we're going to run through a number of things. I'm Lindley Kent. I'm with Newman-Monson Architects. And then Sally Obernolte is also on the line. She's going to be monitoring the chat and helping field any questions. And a special shout out, I don't have listed here, but I see Jonathan Lawrence is on the call as well. He was our landscape architect on the project. So I'm sure if he's able to come off mute as well, if there's questions later on, I'm sure he can jump in too. So there's no real spoiler here. We already know that this building went for the Living Building Challenge, so we're not going to complicate this by talking about how we got to that point. But a little project context for background here. This project started in 2020 or shortly there before when we were awarded this project. And once we knew we were going for Living Building Challenge, we were quickly pulling in team members that would help us field out this amazing team. Like I mentioned, there's a few on the call, but ECT, biohabitats, and integrated eco strategies specifically are team members that we maybe wouldn't typically have on projects that we became acquainted with for this project specifically. And we're not quite certified yet. We're just about ready to submit our ready audit. So that's going to be coming up here very soon. So the Stanley Center for Peace and Security is a nonprofit that partners with people, organizations, and the greater global community to drive policy progress in 3 issue areas: mitigating climate change, avoiding the use of nuclear weapons, and preventing mass violence and atrocities. The center was created in 1956 and maintains its independence while developing forums for diverse perspectives and ideas. So when the Stanley Center came to us, they were looking for a new headquarters building. And they had wrestled with this thought of, do we want to stay in Muscatine, Iowa? We are located right in the middle of the country. We're right on the Mississippi River, but this is a smaller Midwestern town. And they had some challenges attracting talent and retaining that talent, where many of these nonprofits are located on the coasts. So just for a little context here, on the living certification map, we're located at that blue arrow right in the middle of the country. Oh, maybe I have to click here. There we go. There's my animation highlighting right in the middle. So we are located right in the middle of the country, if you're not familiar where that is located. But once the project got kicked off, we went through some extensive site research. We looked at probably 60 different sites and had to come up with a way to help the Stanley Center evaluate choosing a site. And so you'll just see here on the screen this matrix that highlights a few of the criteria that we were looking at and helping them go through how to actually decide on a site. And ultimately, we came down to these 4 that you see on the screen here. A couple of them were existing sites, a couple of them were new builds. We had wrestled with them on the pros and cons of a new build versus an existing building, and what that really meant. And you'll see that the one highlighted there, the former Musser Public Library, was an existing site and didn't exactly score great. But in the end, I think what the Stanley Center really had to do was take a look at their values and decide, what made the most sense for them, what aligned most. And they knew that the most sustainable building you can build is the one that you don't. And so aside from doing that, this building had sat on the public's roles. For a while, it was vacant. The library had moved. There was no interest in anybody taking this property. And with it being a library, there were some real building constraints that had to be dealt with, which made it unattractive for many potential other users. And so they really decided that it was important to be a member in this community and to give back to the community by taking this important spot downtown in this urban location and making something really beautiful of it. And then the decision to pursue the Living Building Challenge really came at this point, once we had chosen this site. So accepting the challenge. So the place Petal really felt like a natural start, and it really fit with the Stanley Center's mission and values. So it allowed it to have a very intentional focus. A few things that were initially on the top of our mind were the constraints of this existing building on an urban site and how that related to the Living Building Challenge. However, once we dove in, though this is not part of the place Petal directly, the biophilic workshop was certainly a very important overlap point that we found helped us with this place Petal. So what I didn't mention was we've never done a Living Building Challenge previous to this. And the Stanley Center, obviously, this is their first building project, and they were willing to bring us along and say, hey, we're going to go through this process and we're going to learn together, which was just an amazing thing to have a client understand and say that they're going to partner with us for that reason. So going into this, we didn't know what it meant to hold a biophilic workshop. We hadn't done it before, but after going through that became one of our most meaningful and foundational aspects of the entire process, really. And it kicked off our outreach into the community, which, sorry, I missed a click there. This outreach to the community was required and an imperative one under the place Petal in a couple different ways. And so this workshop, as required, was 8 hours. And it's important to note that this was during 2020, so that meant everything was virtual. We were not getting together. So we had to figure out what it meant to hold this workshop and then hold this virtually. And so we broke it into 2 4-hour sessions. We had everybody participate, all of the staff members of the Stanley Center. And this image is the image prior to the activities. And then once we held those activities over those 8 hours, you can just see how the board filled out and flourished. And what was important here was we sought to include community members in this biophilic workshop. This was the start, as I mentioned, of kind of our community outreach and our understanding of site and power of place. So we lined up guest speakers to provide context to the people, the culture, the place. We had an ecologist come and spoke to the ecological history of the site and the surrounding area. We had a historian that was local to Muscatine, and we had one of the former librarians at that public library building that we were now going to take over, come in and share some stories there. So as I mentioned, this was very foundational, and overall the biophilic workshop really helped us understand how the power of place could be honored in our new space. We knew that the design needed to not only honor the rich human history on that plot of land, but also honor its legacy as part of nature and try and make the building work as a part of nature and not in opposition to it. I won't go into all the important historical and cultural themes that were learned that day, but it's true that this workshop was one form of cultural and social assessment. Another more direct form of assessment was a community survey that went out to key community influencers such as various Stanley Center connections, downtown business owners, individuals who received community services, immigrant and refugee communities, area churches, community services, and the list goes on, right? But it was also included on social media for the general public to participate in. And so you can see there was over 125 responses, and there were many, many thoughts related to this. So all of these various thoughts were compiled into themes as best we could come up with, and then kind of thoughts and ideas on how that could inform the design were worked between the design team and the Stanley Center's focus teams. So from all of this foundational work of the biophilic workshop and this community needs surveys and understanding potential partners, there are a lot of ways that place Petal then informed our designs and showed up in material choices, patterns, textures, layouts, and it informed our local partnerships moving forward as well. So I'll touch on a few of those. You'll see that pretty much all the solutions overlap multiple petals and imperatives. So just since we're focused on the place Petal, I'll take you through our little power of place slide, a few slides here. But what we had discovered was the site pre-settlement likely looked much like this. It was a bur oak savanna, had a mostly dry creek bed running through the middle of it. By 1883, we knew based on old Sanborn maps that it looked much more like this. The city of Muscatine was starting to come together. There were many small structures on the site, and really the town blocks were starting to take shape. By 1901, the creek is completely buried when the first Musser Public Library is built on its site. And in 1963, an addition expanded services to the library. In 1971, that original library was torn down due to sinking foundations. And in that same year, a new public face of the Musser Public Library was built on deep foundations. This was the building as we knew it. So in 2020, we were taking on this building, knowing that we were trying to achieve the Living Building Challenge. And this had a deep floor plate. There wasn't a lot of access to daylight. We knew we needed to find a home for urban agriculture, and the roof wasn't going to work for that. Structurally. And the Stanley Center had also talked about having some outdoor space. So one of the most instrumental design strategies that we started with was adding this courtyard. So we carved out this portion, and this necessitated us reaching out through the dialogue on our FAR calculations, because technically we're reducing the FAR of our site. But with this being an existing building on an urban site, I think ILFI understood our challenge and how many needs this courtyard was going to meet, and that overall the net benefit to the project was it just made sense. So this courtyard really created our space for urban agriculture. It allowed light into the building, and it gave that outdoor gathering space to the Stanley Center. Looking to have impact beyond the project's boundaries, the Stanley Center partnered with the Muscatine Center for Social Action, which is a service that serves people experiencing homelessness on what sort of fresh produce or herbs that they could use. And they responded in that community needs survey and then became a partner throughout this whole project. But they responded they could use more fresh herbs and greens. And so that's what was planted. And that kind of acts as anything that the Stanley Center can't use, all that surplus is then sent to the Muscatine Center for Social Action, or the MCSA. You'll also see highlighted at the bottom there some little people. That's the main entry to the food pantry. So I'm not going to talk extensively about our energy system, but that was another opportunity to have impact beyond the project's boundaries when we realized that we couldn't generate all the electricity we needed with our solar system on the roof. And so we added a canopy over the alley because many patrons of the MCSA actually queued in that space, and that really dignified that alley. It made it a place that people could gather. And then we paired that with plans for a future mural along that space. Besides adding the canopy over the alley to improve the MCSA's experience, the sidewalks didn't have any street trees previously. It was, there was no stormwater attention, so we were able to add a lot of greenery and a lot of off-site, technically, stormwater performance on those sidewalks. You also see that the extensive stormwater management strategies use native plantings to add beauty and greenery around the building on the public faces and improve the site's ecology. The site walls that surround the bioretention area and at the entry plaza, they serve as resting areas for that community, and we're designed that way. So there were just little touches here and there that, based on that community needs surveys, we were able to say, oh, well, they asked for benches. Okay, benches don't really fit, but here's another way we could add like a resting spot for somebody waiting for the bus. And I love how on our photography day, this image here, we just showed up and there happened to be a whole class there on their own accord, learning and gathering outside the building. So it clearly has become a community gathering spot. Soon, our educational signage required by Imperative 20 will strengthen that power of place story when they're installed in the coming months. And then looking back, reflecting on how the Place Petal informed this project, we really used it as a foundational way throughout the project and looked for opportunities to have local impact and community partnerships. So just a few to touch on, there's a sustainability fair that drew, if I'm remembering numbers correctly, it was somewhere over 2,000 people, which is crazy for the town of Muscatine, but drew many people to come learn about the building and gave other local companies and organizations an opportunity to, display what they do and to reach out to the general public as well. Obviously, the building's going to serve as a teaching tool. It already is. We did we kind of took a step back and used hand printing in our water systems as a value alignment and another opportunity for additional outreach beyond the project's boundaries. I already mentioned the crops in the urban agricultural plot, and there's even additional stories as far as having Ukrainian refugees have recently come and been able to harvest things and take them back to their families. And there's a Slack channel that the Stanley Center's building occupants kind of shoot messages or pictures back of butterflies and pollinators that they see coming and going from these plantings. We were able to use button blanks from kind of a historical important industry from the Muscatine area as part of our backsplash. We have the Tree of Accountability, which is a very important conversation between Indigenous culture and what was kind of framed as settlers of Muscatine as an art installation that was kind of a community effort. And in closing, the Place Petal, has a lot of meaningful alignment for this project. That we think, looking back, I think the community needs assessment could have taken a couple different forms rather than just a survey. And even with all of the input that we had, I think we had a hard time finding that right balance between being a private building that needs to do what the Stanley Center needs to do on a daily basis as a nonprofit, and how that integrates with what the public is asking for, and it not being a public building. And so trying to incorporate things where they made sense from both standpoints and making sure we're having that net positive was certainly a challenge. And it, this is the Stanley Center's first time that they had a public face. They've been in Muscatine for many years, but this was their first opportunity to interface with the general public. And so this showed them a lot of different ways that they may not have realized they could have interfaced otherwise. So hopefully that's a good synopsis of some of the highlights of our Place Petal. And thanks for having us. I think we'll take questions after the next presentation.
Thank you, Lindley. That was a fantastic work by the team. Yeah, so now we'll move on to the water petal. So the water petal is one of our more challenging petals, but it's also one of the more transformative and inspiring petals to see project teams accomplish. So it challenges teams to treat water like a precious resource, and the Santa Monica City Hall team really rose to that challenge and is a great example for other project teams pursuing certification under the water petal. So within the context of the Living Building Challenge 4.0, the water petal is structured around two imperatives: with responsible water use, which is a core imperative, and net positive water. With the responsible water use imperative, we challenge teams to conserve water by increasing water efficiency. So by 50% for new construction and 30% for existing buildings. We also challenged teams to treat stormwater on site, detain peak discharges, and manage volume to infiltrate stormwater to the maximum extent feasible, with the overarching objective of preserving local ecological integrity. The net positive water imperative builds on the goals of responsible water use. So with that imperative, we're seeking to really redefine conventional water use paradigms. So projects are challenged to create a closed loop water system. So those efforts may encompass the capture of precipitation, the recycling of used water, and the purification of water without harmful chemical agents. In regards to gray and black water, we encourage teams to use on-site treatment and strategic water management with an emphasis on systems that really align with ecological principles. We also challenge teams to promote water resiliency by ensuring a week's supply of drinking water for all regular inhabitants. So it's really an essential facet of emergency preparedness and adaptability. So these are really lofty goals, and we commend teams that take on the challenge. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Santa Monica City Hall team to tell us about how they approach the imperatives under the water petal.
Great, thank you. I think Julian is going to share his screen and I'll kick us off.
Hopefully you can see that.
Yes. Great. All right. So thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to talk through the water petal and our story today. I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of the project, and then I'll hand it over to Julian. Next slide, please. There we go. So who we have today, myself, I'm Amber Shane. I'm with the City of Santa Monica, and I'm the acting Chief Operating Officer. I was the project manager for this project for the city. Then we have Julian, who is our principal with Borough Happold and was in charge of not only the MEP design, but also the sustainability strategies as a whole for this building. And then Joshua Nelson is here today as our contractor. This was a design build project. He was the senior project manager with Hathaway Dinwiddie. And just want to mention that our architect was Frederick Fisher and Partners. They were an integral part of the team as well. But you've got just the three of us today. Next slide. So this is an overview of City Hall East. It was called the City Services Building. It went through a name change. So if you're looking it up, that's the two that you see. The building is kind of smack dab in the middle there. Between the building on the right is our public safety facility, and the building on the left is our historic City Hall. And so this building is an addition to our historic City Hall. We are, well, I guess next slide will be better to talk through that. So the city, right, so our project context, Santa Monica, here's our public counter. This is why we were doing the project. We outgrew our historic City Hall like 4 decades ago. And Santa Monica, next slide please, is at the forefront of sustainability. We're about to actually celebrate our 30th year of our first sustainable city plan, which is huge. We have some very lofty goals, not the least being carbon neutrality on or before 2050 for our whole city. We have a net zero waste goal by 2030, water neutrality ordinance citywide, and we're on 100% clean power, green power through our Clean Power Alliance as a city as well, with a 96% opt-in rate on that one. So we've got some big things that we've been working on. We are also the first municipality to construct a living building. So we like to say that we are the world's most sustainable municipal building because we're the only one, which, you know, hopefully that holds. Next slide, please. So when the city was looking at consolidating our resources, right, we had staff in 3 to 4 different locations. And that made it really hard on our community members to get their business done with the city because they had to go all over the place. We knew that we weren't going to do just a code standard building, that we were going to go above and beyond. Next slide, please. So when we undertook this, we did a whole cost analysis. We started back in 2014. So sort of an interesting counterpoint to the project that we just saw is like, oh man, you got this done in like 3 years. Our story is way longer than that. But feasibility was in 2014. We started construction in 2017, and we opened on time and under budget for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day in 2020 to nobody. So our story is very, very different, unfortunately, but we are in that performance period as well, which is also awesome. So we're getting there. We're getting there. Just COVID kind of messed things up. So you can see where City Hall East sits related to our historic City Hall. Next slide, please. And we thought we'd just take you through a little bit of how it works. So historic City Hall, again, is on the left. Our courtyard, much like the project we just heard about, this was, we didn't have to take apart a building, but this was a leftover space that was an alley. And so City Hall East is 3 stories up of office. The first floor has our public counter, which is what that one picture was showing. So we are open Monday through Thursday, 8 to 4, and people can come in just to see the building if they want, or come in to get a building permit, planning review, get a rain barrel, all sorts of things. And then our mechanicals in the basement, so that our roof is largely held just for our solar panels and minimal mechanical wells. Next question, next slide, please. So again, there's that picture of where we are. Next slide. These will go pretty quickly. This is that public counter. This is a really great space when you come in, right? Flooded with daylight. It's our community members have been really happy with it. Keep going now, that's fine. The next slide shows a little bit about the workplace. You'll see one of the green mosses above my head. That's where I'm sitting. But it's a wonderful space that staff has really embraced. And it's a little bit of what it looks like on the inside. But today, next slide, we are here to talk about the water petal. And so I'm not going to steal Julian's thunder, but our composters are a massive hit here. I'd say this is the thing that we get most questions on. And it allows us to be a demonstration site. That's really why Santa Monica did this project, was not to say, yay, city, you did a good job. It's to say, in this climate zone, this is what's possible. And that we've had a lot of folks come through and a lot ask about the composters and how do they work and what does that mean? Does it smell bad and ventilation and all that stuff? So Julian will talk a lot more about that. And then the next slide is about our water treatment room, which Julian will also talk about, but we're the first in California to drink our rainwater, which in some states you're allowed to do, but here it's a little bit harder. And so we're really excited about the water story in general, and we'll be available for questions if there's time after. So I'll hand it over to Julian.
Thanks, Amber. So first part, accepting the challenge. This pedal was definitely the hardest for us as a team in a water stressed area. And when we started on this back in 2014, we were in the middle of a really bad drought as well, which was good in some ways because it created some momentum to look at some ambitious solutions. And I'll just take you through kind of our process a little bit. So the first thing we did was we assembled the water data for the historic rainfall data. And what we saw is that there was a lot of variation in the rainfall year to year. And this was a problem for us in trying to meet our demands from what fell on the site from the sky. So that was the first challenge that this really highlighted. The second was that you can see the trend line there. The amount of water we're getting is reducing year on year, and we aren't getting as much. So we had to be mindful of both the variation year to year and the fact that we can't rely on it as much going forwards as we could in the past. The second thing we did was to understand the scale of the problem was to develop our water budget. And this was a water budget developed based on conventional solutions with water closets, nothing built in yet for efficiency, to really just understand the scale of the problem and the opportunities. And you see, you get the variation year to year, but we also get variation in month to month, that we get a lot of rainfall in the winter, and our highest demand is in the summer. So we have another problem, which is just the month to month variability. And this also highlighted for us, we really needed to push hard on water efficiency and demand reduction if we were going to stand any chance of getting this to work and not drive the costs up from excessive storage. The next thing that I did early on to kind of prove a point here is analyzed a ridiculously large tank just to prove we couldn't store our way out of it. It wasn't a solution where we just create a bigger tank and store more rainwater because of the variation on a monthly basis and the variation on an annual basis. And what it also reinforced to us is that really you get a lot of utilization out of a 40 to 50,000 tank, but as we increase the tank size, we didn't get that utilization. So these steps were really helpful in helping the team understand we really needed to look at some more ambitious solutions, and this drove us to look hard at two things early on. And I'll get into that in the next section.
With regards to managing the costs and the risk, coming on board early on, having that design build partnership with the city and with Burrell Happold and Frederick Fisher, we had time as we were designing the building to refine those budgets and integrate those systems, which was great because we were able to do cost analysis real time, being able to see where we needed to make changes, but also integrate as things progress through the design over that 3-year process before we even started work. It was also great because we're able to leverage some of our trade partners, bring them on early to utilize some of that knowledge they had to help from the cost standpoint. So it really kept everyone in the loop along the way. We also did, knowing that this was something that hadn't been done before in a lot of aspects, was a good partner in the city who was willing to carry some allowances specifically for this as it relates to ILFI and Living Building Challenge, and material wise, knowing that some of these systems traditionally are constructed with materials we wouldn't necessarily be able to use. So trying to account for the unknowns, but also having real time costs was huge as we went through this process to the final solution.
Right. So we'll get into some of the solutions that we looked at and how we solved this problem for the project. So we studied two things early on. We were looking at wastewater treatment on site to really recycle water from water closets for toilet flushing, so creating that closed loop. And we were looking hard at composting toilets as well. Because we were so close to the ocean, we're in a coastal zone, doing on-site wastewater treatment was extremely challenging from a permitting point of view. And also we had trouble because we were reducing our demand so much. We were looking at a system that was very, very small, around 1,200 gallons to a few thousand gallons a day. And it was much harder to do wastewater treatment at that scale with more lumpiness of demand. So where we ended up as a team is we really, we went down the path of composting toilets to reduce our demand. You can see the water budget here. There's a couple of things I wanted to point out in terms of where we ended up for a solution. One was we had projected at the time, pre-COVID, that we were going to have a lot of people cycling to the building and taking showers. There's a tremendous amount of bike storage there, and cycling is a big part of people's transit solution in Santa Monica. So we set a irrigation goal for the landscape architect to design the irrigation and the landscaping to meet the amount of grey water we projected to have. So that was one approach we had, which was quite a nice way of trying to create that closed loop of using that grey water from the showers to irrigate our urban agriculture. You can see here on the diagram a big reduction from the earlier water budget from taking out those water closets. So that was a massive reduction in water demand. Composting toilets use around 3 tablespoons of water, a few ounces to create the foam for that foam flush action. So every flush, we're saving about 1.28 gallons of water. So that was a huge step to get this water budget to pencil out. You can see in the winter months, we almost have sufficient rainfall from the 40,000 gallon tank we have to meet our demand. And the makeup comes from a well on site, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But this was the approach we took, and we'll see some more photos of those systems coming up. This is our simplified single line of all the systems. Top right, you can see we collect rainwater from the roof and the PV canopy, and that goes to a 40,000 gallon system that we have below the building. That is treated on a couple of skids that you'll see in a moment, and reused for drinking water. So that is the primary solution that we have to meeting the potable water needs. And then the composting toilets are the primary way of reducing the amount of water that we have for dealing with our wastewater needs. And the result is biosolids, compost that can be used within the city, and a smaller amount of leachate, which that was the one piece we had to put to the sewer to get the whole project approved with LA County. And then, of course, we have the grey water. The other piece I wanted to mention here, we have a very, very large infiltration gallery, which are two big concrete systems below the parking lot, below the site PV. They have a volume of over 100,000 gallons, and they infiltrate all the large storms. And we have a net water balance on the site because we infiltrate more storm water than we extract from the ground. So we're actually using the ground really philosophically as our storage. And we're only extracting water from 50 foot down. We are not impacting the aquifers, and we're not impacting saltwater intrusion. And it's actually it's actually an old riverbed that used to flow through there, which is why we have that water that's just trickling out to the ocean. So we have a great strategy overall, and it's very reliant on the groundwater infiltration and the well to deal with our monthly variation and that annual variation. And when we look at it over the historic annual rainfall, we more than comfortably meet that on of always infiltrating more water than we extract. So that takes us to composting toilets. The process was definitely a challenge to get this permitted and approved. They have not been emptied, so because the building's been very lightly occupied the last few years, they're still only around half full. So it's probably going to be another year or so until they need to get emptied. They don't smell. If you go in the room, there's a little bit of an earthy smell, but they don't smell at all. The restrooms don't smell, which was always a big concern ahead of time. We did have to put a lot of bells and whistles onto this design to get it through all the permitting agencies. And I'll show you the various agencies that we had, but we had concerns around things turning anaerobic and not composting as it should. So we had to put in methane sensors and H2S sensors, which have never gone off and never will. We had to create an industrial water system to separate it from physically and create 2 air gaps from the potable water systems to separate the misting scheme from the misting system from the potable water supply. We had to put in an odor neutralizer just in case there are any odor complaints on the adjacent building. And the list goes on and on. But we did address all of the concerns that we had, both from the fire department, from building and safety, who occupy the building, from LA County Department of Public Health, and various other agencies. It really is a very, very simple system. There's a misting system to keep the moisture level appropriate. The Clivis Multrum are the vendor we use. They come in, I think it's once a quarter at the moment, might go up in the future, but they level the pile, they throw in some sawdust, and they keep an eye on it to make sure that it's composting as it should. So it's a very, very simple system to maintain, very, very resilient. If there was, this whole building is designed as an essential services building, which is why you can see all those straps holding everything to the ground. If there was ever a big earthquake, potable water supplies were cut off, the composting system will still provides great resilience that it will keep working in any event that might happen, and this building can really stand alone as an essential services building for the city. Great, so we will now move into the looking back discussion. So I did want to touch on the permitting challenges that we had. I think reflecting back, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves in for when we started this project in terms of how challenging the permitting would be. There were many different agencies that all reviewed every system we had. Key across the board was understanding who the lead agency was and who the other supporting agency was. So that was a key thing that we mapped out early on. And we really worked hard to meet very regularly with all these agencies to really keep them updated and address their concerns. And it was a lot of hard work, but we just kept working through every roadblock and every hoop, and we kept jumping through it. And grey water, for example, that was LA Department of County Health. We got lucky there that they were changing the rules and regulations. So grey water was quite easy. Composting toilets as well. In the end, LA County actually changed their rules as a result of this project to actually make it easier for other projects in remote situations to have composting toilets. So that was a really great outcome from this project, is us helping make this easier for other projects in the future where it makes sense. So just a couple of examples there, but this was definitely a challenge for the project.
With regards to construction complexities, this is the water treatment room, and one of the things, not only in addition to meeting the ILFI standards, was also, as Julian mentioned, this is an essential building, services building for the city. So there's additional layers on top of that to make sure that this building functions in the event of an emergency, and that the city can respond to the community. It's also a 100-year building, so there's a lot more that goes into it. And that was one thing that we see, with regards to the seismic bracing, not only trying to get these systems to work within the space we have, but also accounting for the seismic requirements to make sure they continue to function. One of the big challenges that we had was the site itself. We have City Hall, where we are in contact with our building on the south, as well as an underground parking garage for the public services building on the north. So as we were excavating our footprint, we had to also somehow get our cistern, which sits under about half of the footprint of the building, this 40,000 gallon long cylindrical tank, in the space. So there was a lot of construction complexities that we had to deal with that when you look at it, you don't necessarily see, but we're there along the way, as well as a large teledata infrastructure that had to be rerouted. The 911 call center for the city is in the adjacent building. And so working around a lot of these systems to try and keep things going and not interfere with that was definitely a challenge for us.
Amber, do you have a few
Fantastic.
final?
It's like, I'm on mute. I hate when that happens. You'd think I would have learned by now, but Anyway, so that's a little bit about our project. The water puddle was definitely something that we are very proud of. It was also very hard. But as Julian mentioned, and Josh, right, the hurdles were high, but because we had a great team, and that we, right from the get, everybody was working towards yes. And where you hit no, you got to keep going. And it is a credit to the team and their ability to put processes and systems in place to ensure that we were able to meet things like the red list, but also that upfront, right, those feasibility studies and being able to work together with real costing, right, and the contractor. That design build delivery method was really important for the city because this was a risk, right? Santa Monica likes to be first in a lot of things, but being first is hard. And so we hope that it's been interesting and that you've learned a bit from us. And if anyone is in the area, please come visit. We'd love to give you a tour. And you can try out all of the water systems and go see where the well is and all that kind of stuff that Julian was talking about. But the team just did an amazing job, and I think I can speak for all of us when I can say we're very proud of this project. And so thank you for the time today, and I'll turn it back to ILFI.
Amazing work. It's really, really inspiring to see. So it does seem like we'll have time for one, maybe two questions. So I'll go in the order that they were presented in the chat. So for the Stanley Center, can you further describe the process for identifying the reference habitat?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Jonathan wants to field that one. He's our landscape architect and certainly was probably most responsible for that. Not to put him on the spot or anything.
Sure, I can say just a few words. Yeah, I mean, for the reference habitat, we looked at some of the conditions. Lindley showed kind of the Sanborn maps as well, that kind of cued us into perhaps that stream that was available in the summertime. But we knew that kind of the Bur Oak kind of savanna landscape was characteristic of this area, and so that was really what we looked at sort of for the reference landscape. And then as a kind of ties into the recovery wheels. Our baseline condition, we're heavily urban. There was, the landscape that was sort of existing and out front was primarily turf, a few plants, but very little, mostly mowed turf. But that area and the way that the building was set back really gave us a lot of opportunity for things like stormwater, bioretention areas, that we could then incorporate native plants, things like that would help to build soil, incorporate biodiversity, things like that. So.
And I
Great.
mentioned in the chat too, from a client's perspective, we did not focus directly on that with the client. I think, that's maybe a hard concept to fully understand. And I don't even know that I fully understand it perfectly. But trying to educate them, in the most efficient way possible on the ecology and helping them understand the direction we're working towards and use that biophilic framework to inform how we move forward.
Awesome. And could you please explain further your engagement with the recovery wheel?
Yeah, I was trying to, I guess on my response, kind of try and tie that all in together, just that, again, the baseline, we were starting with very little. But with the components that we were incorporating and sort of thinking of these integrated systems, any plantings that we were going to do, as far as invasive species, things like that, specific to the recovery wheel, we were getting rid of that stuff, incorporating all native, plantings, soils that allow water to infiltrate through them. So again, as part of the stormwater story, and just really optimizing, even in an urban context, every single surface, and being very intentional with everything that we put in there. That's really how we tried to ramp up sort of the target restoration goal and the recovery wheel, sort of through that holistic thinking.
I think, the urban agriculture and kind of pairing some of the plantings with that to encourage some of the pollinators, like it kind of ended up touching, any sort of site work, I guess, if you want to characterize it one way.
Great. That's super helpful to hear about. Julian, thanks for jumping in the chat, answering those questions about toilets. Yeah, so I'll hand it back over to Liz to wrap up the session.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I think we'll just be ending a little bit early here, but we can continue the discussion in our member discussion board. I'll be sending a link in the post-event email, as well as a link to the recording if you missed anything, and a little survey to share your thoughts. But thank you so much to Amber, Lindley, Joshua, Julian, and Jonathan for sharing your expertise with our community today. It's been lovely. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.